So these BM hunters, am I right? I mean, they aren't pushing a lot of buttons to get top DPS, but they do seem to be pushing ours when we still struggle playing enhancement, right? Beastmasters, the way they bait people's salt and rage with their easy rotation makes it seem like they are bait masters. Get it? Like master bait. Hope you enjoyed my 5 minutes, and if you want to be at least as good at the game as well, then this video will solve all of your issues regarding talents, essences, gear, rotation, and more tips and tricks, so stay tuned. A short disclaimer. The video will focus on the basics and fundamentals to get you started quick on your Raid and Mythic Plus journey, but there is always room to learn even more, and all jokes aside, I have seen very few BM hunters that trash the spec for being too simple and also be really good at the spec, so you know, show some appreciation. Starting from the first row, you have Animal Companion as the best and most used option on the row. It adds a second pet to your arsenal that follows the commands of your main pet, and most importantly, kill commands as well. This could also add potential nuisances such as pet management, travel time from target to target where more damage is essentially squandered that way. But Blizzard has sturdily improved the pet AI over the years. Still feels smart as a brick though. If you don't want the hassle of that, you can go with Killer Instinct that funnels way more damage into somewhat of an execute phase. It's a bit more consistent, but overall would not out DPS Animal Companion, so this is more of a comfort pick. We recommend Animal Companion though, since double hottie brings joy to everyone's eyes. Second row, take one with the pack. This talent is the first piece in building your Beastmaster, very crit centric. The other being an Azerite trait we will discuss in a bit. What this talent does is actually buff your Wild Call passive to give a 40% chance on critically hitting a target to reset a barb shot charge. This happens only on auto shots and makes critical strike very strong and essentially not have a cap, meaning you can stack it endlessly since you won't reach 100% crit chance anyway, and the more you have, the more often you reset barb shot, meaning the higher uptime on your frenzy buff and bestial wrath. This will be the main focus of your playstyle. It's not a difficult concept to grasp, but pretty punishing if you mess it up, so maximizing each barb shot usage requires a healthy grasp of GCD and the GCD window, and a bit of forward planning when it comes to what globals you will be casting in the next few seconds. Mastering this will definitely set you apart from your average BM. Third row is a survivability row with essentially all options viable. Natural Mending will be your overall best choice here in all situations. It reduces the cooldown of your exhilaration each time you spend focus, giving you more self-sustain over a long fight. One of the issues with all hunter specs today is the lack of defensives. Sure, you have Turtle, an almost immune skill, but that doesn't reduce the damage you take from anything outside those 8 seconds every 3 minutes. Having your personal heal more available is the closest you can get at this point, since there's quite a decent amount of mandatory group damage in both raids and dungeons. Camouflage is a nice alternative for dungeons, however, giving you the option to do some cool stuff like stealth past packs, start freehold RP scenarios if you don't have a rogue, although you might not need it as much in keys over 10. Mythics have frequent downtimes between packs where you can get healed, reducing the effectiveness of Natural Mending and giving you some versatility tools instead, and this might net you some better results overall. Next up, Thrill of the Hunt will be a straightforward choice. It essentially has the same duration and stack potential as the Frenzy buff that Barb Shot already applies. It's a strong crit buff at the same time, plays into what I mentioned earlier of you being punished if you mess up your rotation. Not only will you lose your Frenzy buff and have to start stacking it again, but you will also lose this buff as well, double dipping into the DPS drop. It sounds like I'm trashing the spec, but really I just hope to make it clear how important it is to optimize your barb shot usage. Next up, more utility. Post haste will be your mobility option since Beastmasters need mobility bad. Alright, we know that BM is the most comfortable spec to play in terms of positioning, since it's currently the only ranged class that can do everything in its kit without having to stand still. That doesn't help if suddenly you need to go from point A to point B, since walk speed is still shit speed. Alternatively, you can play Binding Shot. Although mostly seen in dungeons, this can also be used to bind the thing from beyond at any time. In Mythics, it has the added utility of helping your tank kite and drop things like necrotic stacks, or simply prevent mobs from chasing your party members with any fixate mechanic they would have. Row number 6 sees Stomp again as the best option in terms of DPS output, and in case you were wondering, yes, your animal companion also stomps when you barb shot. This is a passive AoE option that works whenever you barb shot a target, filling in the consistent damage Beastmasters can do in multi-target scenarios. Nothing much to say to this except to keep in mind that it can break CCs if targets are close enough, since you cannot really control it without actually just not casting barb shot, which is not something you would ever want to do. Last row, we have Killer Cobra as the single target burst option. You'll probably use this in raids more than anything. In your Bestial Wrath window, your Cobra shots will reset kill command, giving you a different rotation to keep in mind, and generally very high damage considering your already crit focus build will give you more Bestial Wraths, meaning more kill command resets. An alternative, mostly used in Mythic dungeons, is Aspect of the Beast. This is a simple set and forget passive that buffs your pet into doing way more damage. Most of your overall DPS comes from your pet anyway, so pet management is pretty key. To take maximum advantage of most talents and to be more efficient in general, I recommend you use pet attack macros like the one on the screen on most of your abilities. This will make sure your pet will always change targets properly and not have any silly AI delays between you starting combat and them deciding to also join in. It helps a bit with the AI and also gives you way more control over your pet without actually using its pet commands to complicate the rotation with too many buttons, am I right? Here we go, the age-old story of BFA. You probably think we will tell you to sim. Well, to be honest, you actually just have to sim, really. I mean, there's a fairly standard stat priority seeing crit at the very top. How top? Top. We already went over why crit is important, and after it we have haste, which of course brings about all the benefits haste can bring, on top of you getting more auto shots in, meaning more potential wild call procs. Lastly, mastery and versatility are closer to the bottom, but how close depends on your gear and stat weights, which you can get by installing the Simulation Craft add-on and using its /simc command to copy your character's data and paste it into raidbots.com to get an accurate depiction of the strength of each individual stat. With that in mind, we can address consumables, which for the purpose of the video will be crit-centric. Rarely will you need to change them, but if you would have to, it would mostly be with their haste counterparts. As such, a Chord of Critical Strike and Deadly Lava Lazuli will be your ring enchants and gems accordingly to be used. If you're just gearing up, you can use one Leviathan's Eye of Agility in one of the available sockets, but this will steadily lose its value as you get higher and higher in eye level. Your weapon enchant will ideally be Gale Force Striking. This will give you more auto shots, which means, again, more potential wild call procs. This again, an argument once you're decently geared and already tackling 8.3 and endgame content. You can sim your character to see if a crit alternative would be better, but ideally you want to reach the point where this will be your best option. This enchant will perform even better once you have the new Corrupted Hunter weapon, which we will discuss in a bit. The Greater Flask of the Currents will be a pretty obvious choice, with the Potion of Unbridled Fury being your best single target DPS potion available. If you're fighting multiple targets and you can be close in melee range, then take Empower Proximity, which works when mobs are within 8 yards of you. Otherwise, Superior Battle Potion of Agility will be your overall best AoE option, mostly in Mythic dungeons. As for the food, McDowell's Big Mac will be your crit option as long as you are playing the build we are recommending. Otherwise, you can still go with Feast, especially at lower eye levels. The Azerite traits have become more and more set in stone, starting with 8.2 and pretty much stabilized right now. I mean, you can still sim for very marginal increases, but overall, going for this specific build should net you the best results. Stack Dance of Death 3 times. This is the trait we mentioned will complete and solidify your crit as your best stat. One thing to understand about BFA gear is that each stat scales off of each other, meaning the more you have of one thing, the better the others usually are. The way this works here is that Barb Shot gives you a huge chunk of agility for 8 seconds, a proc chance equal to your crit chance, again, lasting just as long as Frenzy. The other trait you want to stack, but not with as much priority, is Primal Instincts. This makes your Aspect of the Wild give you a large chunk of Mastery and a free Barb Shot charge, which is why you always want at least one of these. The rest of the slots will be filled by generic stat traits like Heart of Darkness, Haze of Rage, and really any crit proccing trait ideally. This is essentially the single target focus build. The only thing you change for AoE and dungeons is include one rapid reload. This makes any multi-shot that hits 3 or more targets reduce the cooldown of your aspects by 1 second. Reducing the cooldown of Aspect of the Wild is pretty obviously good, as well as Turtle and Cheetah, of course. There are quite a few major essences that are good for you in single target. We will recommend mainly 2, but feel free to test and play with others, essences that is, and see what works for you. Whirlvein Resonance is a good number 1 contender when you can stay still near your spikes for longer, and even more so when other people in your group use this, so you can benefit from the miner more. The alternative is Vision of Perfection. This will proc Aspect of the Wild, which brings in the benefits of Primal Instincts as well, meaning a free Barb Shot and a bunch of Mastery. It does have an RNG component to it, but with the 8.3 buffs to it, it performs better than before, where you will have, on average, a proc almost every minute, on top of reducing the cooldown of Aspect of the Wild. As minor options, you can go with Breath of the Dying as one of the strongest DPS choices this patch, especially if you need a 10 corruption resistance. Conflict and Strife is particularly good since it's a consistent large versatility buff that's even more valuable since you would otherwise have very little versatility. The last option can be filled by either focusing Iris if you don't have to switch targets often to drop the buff stacks, or Blood of the Enemy for a solid pick either way. I did mention these essences are good in single target, but that doesn't mean you cannot and should not go more AoE focused in this raid, considering how many adds and cleave fights there are. For those situations and generally all Mythic plus dungeon runs, go with Blood of the Enemy Major. It requires you to be a bit up and personal with the pack or group of adds, which is easier for Beast Mastery than any other range spec anyway. There are plenty of fights in Ny'alotha that can benefit this as well. The alternative is focusing Iris, mostly used in lower Mythic plus keys for the short damage burst, since packs die quicker and more frequent there for Blood of the Enemy to be as efficient. As minors, depending on your major, focusing Iris is a solid one, with Breath of the Dying essentially not missing from almost any DPS dispatch. Conflict and Strife and Vision of Perfection are also good options as well. If you raided in Palace and have the Ashvane's Razor Coral, then it's a good place to start as a trinket. It currently sims really well if you have it at a high eye level, but seems to drop off in value once you reach the later parts of the raid, so having a humming black dragon scale to replace it with will be a good place to start. It's a solid haste proc trinket, and the reason I am mentioning it is because it drops on the first boss of the raid and it's very accessible that way. Later on, you get the Vita Charged Titan Shard and the Void Twisted Titan Shard, completing the set and giving you a nice agility boost. One neat little trick you can do is to use the Azerite trait Duck and Cover that provides another absorb once the Void Absorb procs to increase the uptime on the buff. Alternatively, you can go with the dungeon trinkets like, Harlan's Loaded Dice and Deadeye Spyglasses, and essentially any crit and haste proc alternatives if they are at a high level from, your Mythic plus cash. Fortunately for hunters, the Raid Corrupted weapon is actually your best in slot. Not many specs get this opportunity. The Whispering Eldritch Bow gives you the Whispered Truths Corruption, where your auto shots reduce the cooldown of a hunter ability by 2 seconds. Hence why we mentioned haste is also a very good stat, or essentially whatever makes you attack faster. The only downside of the weapon is that it has a normie name, as opposed to stuff like Ny'alotha and Vorzjokal that have a S-tier name. God damn it, man, never satisfied. As for the corruption effects, as with all classes, Infinite Stars is the best pure single target damage dealing option, while Twilight Devastation would be the AoE version. I would recommend you go for Severe, increasing the crit amount you gain from all sources. Expedient with the haste alternative, or really any haste and crit procs will be good to fill in the gap, since ideally you already have the weapon corruption baseline. Gushing Wounds is just shy of being your #1 DPS per corruption cost, behind Severe Tier 3. Considering you are following the build we recommended, you start the fight with Whirlvein Resonance and Bestial Wrath just before the pool. Use Barb Shot twice, cast Aspect of the Wild, use Kill Command, then Cobra Shot, Kill Command again. Keep Frenzy up with Barb Shot as you are doing this. If you are not using Whirlvein Resonance Major, then simply cast Bestial Wrath only. The reason you Barb Shot twice back to back is to prevent capping on charges, since Aspect of the Wild gives you 1 charge anyway. In terms of the ability priority in single target, not the actual rotation though, you want to cast Whirlvein on cooldown or delay it a few seconds if it can line up with Aspect of the Wild. Next most important thing is refreshing the Frenzy buff without letting it drop. Keep Bestial Wrath on cooldown, or you can delay it about 15 max seconds if it would line up with Aspect of the Wild. If Aspect of the Wild is coming off cooldown, spend all your Barb Shots and then cast, Aspect of the Wild. Cast Kill Command on cooldown, cast Barb Shots to prevent capping on the charges if your second charge is halfway off cooldown, cast Cobra Shot to prevent focus capping, and when Kill Command has more than 2 seconds of cooldown left. Lastly, cast Barb Shot if capping the charges would happen before the Frenzy buff would drop. Just to clarify, I know I am letting Frenzy drop in this section of the video, but the idea is to give you a visual cue as to which ability is more important to cast in which situation. I simplified the priority just a bit, but there are more details and intricacies to BM than you might give it credit for. In AoE situations, especially if you have rapid reload, which you should, keeping Beast Cleave up with multi-shot is ideal, and spending your focus on multi-shots in 3 or more target scenarios is recommended to reduce the cooldown of Aspect of the Wild. Other than this, keep in mind that we mentioned just earlier about Frenzy and cooldowns, with one other note that you will stop using kill commands on 4 or more targets. Shout out to Serbi for checking and explaining a few things in our video. The feedback he provided us with is amazing and we are super grateful. You can find Serbi in the Hunters Lodge Discord, where you can connect and should connect with top hunters for more advanced tips and tricks, like Azerthorian's tips, who wrote the Icy Veins guide and has been a top hunter for a long time. All of the advanced things that we skip to keep the video quick and accessible can be found in his guide and other great online resources. And of course, we're not gonna end the video without a shout out to our patrons. Whoa, you guys rock so much. Come on guys, thank you so much for supporting us. We love you so much for it and we're super grateful. No, really. And if you're also interested in, supporting us a little bit more, you can check the links down below. There is the Patreon link and our merch link with some really cool Marcelian&Line graphs that you can use for your t-shirts, hoodies, and all those good stuff. Thank you very much for watching the video. We hope it helped and we'll see you in the next one.